Hello, this is John Majori with MajoriOnBowie.com. You've come to the MajoriOnBowie.com YouTube channel where I post an interview once a week that has something to do with David Bowie. And for daily content, visit the blog, www.majorionbowie.com, where I put a new post up every single day. So there's updated content every single day. Today, I'm very, very excited to have a return guest, Mark Wardel. Mark is a renowned artist, also known as Trademark, who is an acclaimed figurative painter whose work explores the themes of identity, transformation, and self-created personas adopted by outsiders such as David Bowie. Mark's work is very well known and beloved amongst Bowie fans. And of course, not just Bowie fans, but if you're watching this, that description probably applies to you. And you almost certainly are familiar with Mark's work, even if you don't know Mark's name, which you probably do as well. Mark's art merges classical portraiture with influences from post-punk graphics, 1970s and 1980s New York art, especially like the street scene, pop art, and other influences that we're going to be talking about today. And the end result is vibrant, it's alive, it's energetic, and it's really just a pleasure just to look at. So Mark, welcome back. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Hi, John. Lovely to talk to you again. Finally.
Yeah. Thank you. So you see behind me, one of my favorite pieces of art from Mark. And I wanted to talk, I'm going to pull up some of your images, if you bear with me here for a moment. Okay, so one of the things that is striking among some of your portraits of David Bowie is your use of color. And gold in particular appears frequently in many of your portraits. And here's one example. And when I'm looking at your use of gold, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but I thought of medieval icons. And Bowie is often called an icon, but I'm showing these are not your works now. These are very old works. They're actual devotional pieces of art that make use of the color gold. And so there's a couple of questions I wanted to ask before we come back to your art here. And so Mark, what is this piece called?
This piece is called Newton Checks In, and it's basically a screenshot from a scene in The Man Who Fell to Earth, where Bowie has arrived in New Mexico at the hotel, and he's got out of his limo to walk in to check into the hotel. I've always been in love with 1970s American cars, especially limousines, Cadillacs, Lincoln. This is a Lincoln Continental.
Yeah.
And Bowie was as well. I mean, as soon as he made enough, as soon as he got hitched up with Main Man and had kind of expenses and everything, his preferred mode of transport was American cars. I mean, he drove them in Britain, and he drove American cars, obviously, in America. So he's kind of very associated with American cars, especially limousines. Obviously, being a rock star, he would travel about in limousines. So this is kind of my two obsessions in one picture, really. I guess.
Yeah, obviously the car stands out, and my understanding is, I have not seen this in life, but my understanding is this is a very large painting. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. It's about 6 foot wide by about 3 foot deep. So I mean, it's not super giant, but it's decent size, Yeah, it was recently exhibited. I had a show in London back in July, and it was kind of it seems to be the piece that everybody is drawn to. So yeah, I'm happy about that, really, because it's one of the ones that I enjoyed painting kind of the most, really.
Yeah. So just 2 minutes ago, as you're describing it, you described it as a screenshot, and there's elements, the car and Bowie himself, that have almost photographic quality, but there's other elements that are not that at all, uh, such as the background, but also the background contrasts with the lack of color in the car and in the figure of Bowie, other than his hair. So I'm going to sort of throw out two questions at once. The one is, was the contrast deliberate and what we were trying to achieve with that? But also, that association that I made with the use of the color gold, where in those devotional works from a long time ago, I think that color was used to suggest kind of otherworldliness or holiness. And is that something that was in the front of your mind when you were making this particular painting?
Well, to answer your first question, yeah, the contrast was definitely deliberate because I liked the idea that the only colors were the gold and the kind of orange gold and red of Bowie's hair, which kind of chimed in together. And it created a nice contrast, as you say, between the monochrome and the gold. What I never like to do is, if I'm basing a painting on a photograph or something, I never like to copy it exactly because there's no point. So I think that the idea was to isolate the two images, the two main images, and put them against this flat background that could be interpreted in any kind of way, really. You could interpret it as you have with medieval icons. You could interpret it as a sunset or the colors of the desert, because there's a lot of desert in the Manifesto Earth. So it kind of fits with that. Interesting that you bring up the thing about medieval icons, because I had a very, very good friend called Johnny Stewart, who back in the days of the Blitz Club, he was Sotheby's London Russian icons expert. And
Yeah.
he had the most amazing townhouse in Notting Hill Gate, which was full of original Russian icons, four-poster beds, chandeliers, and everything. And he had the greatest parties. He had Paul Getty Jr. was living there for a while. Steve Strange was living there for a while with Rusty Egan, models. He gave the greatest parties where aristocrats, blitz kids, fashion people all mixed together in this incredible house. And I spent a lot of time there. And I think probably just the whole icons thing kind of seeped into my consciousness through that. And of course, what I tried to do in my commercial works for nightclubs, particularly the gay clubs, was to create hopefully iconic images, which is kind of, luckily, that's how it turned out. So
Yeah.
there is definitely there's definitely a big connection between it.
Yeah. Did you have also Bowie used the color gold in some of his lyrics, or the other thing that I was thinking of is the line from station to station. My face shows some kind of glow, and the painting is painted in such a way that it looks like it's glowing. I mean, you could correct me. I think that the glowing effect is not actual the way light was falling on the photograph of the painting, but it's in the painting itself. Is that right?
Um, yeah, it's difficult to say. I mean, this is the painting actually in the gallery, as you can see.
Yeah.
It wasn't really lit very well because obviously the gold is a lot flatter than that.
Yeah.
It kind of gives it a bit of depth. Um, but yeah, also, yes, you mentioned about Bowie's lyrics, and of course, what was one thing that was in my mind thinking about the gold was Golden Years, which was obviously written and recorded around this time. So that kind of goes into the mix. So there's a whole lot of stuff in that sort of mix. But I think while I was painting it, it was kind of, sometimes you go on autopilot and you don't really know why you're doing what you're doing. And it's only later on when you start to talk about it, like, we're doing now, that
Yeah.
all these different possibilities come up.
When you're working on a painting like this, what are you, do you have music on in the background? What are you listening to?
Yeah, well, generally speaking, I listen to BBC Radio 6
Yeah.
music.
Yeah.
They play a whole array of classic old music, but also you hear new stuff. Um, you know, because you know, it's good to not just be a prisoner of the you know, I could just listen to Bowie all day or 70s music, but it, you know, it's good to discover new stuff. So pretty much I just listen to BBC Six while I'm working. But yeah, always music. I mean,
Yeah.
I music has ever since I was a very young kid. I don't know whether we spoke about this last time. I grew up in the 60s in a fairground sort of environment by the sea, and you always heard pop music from the fairground, from the jukeboxes, from all of that. All my summer holiday jobs were on the pier in amusement arcades. So I've always been around music, and I've always been obsessed with it. I've always got music going around in my head, even when I haven't gone. And yeah, so I'm always working to music, or always.
Yeah. Well, so let me just ask two last questions about this piece to get more at your technique. I, you know, we started by talking about this, and you called it like a screenshot, and it has elements that are you know, reminiscent of a photograph. But again, I'm just repeating myself. There's other parts that are not. And if you look at Bowie's body, I mean, there's an interesting example of what I'm talking about. My eye goes to his head, where the detail is so meticulous that you could tell the shape of his face. But if you go down his body, it becomes less defined, so that by the time you get to his legs, it's like the outline colored in black, and the shadow is, you know, it's obviously a shadow, but it's not, you know, it doesn't look like what a photograph of a shadow would look like. Are these techniques that are deliberate to draw us to his face, or what's your strategy in painting it that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think with paint, with anything, any artwork of Bowie, obviously you're drawn to his face because he had such an incredible face. So I think there was probably I probably spent more, just to be blatant about it, I probably spent more time on his face than I did on the rest of the body. I like the idea that it's the body is almost like a silhouette in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, it could be taken as like a flat silhouette, a graphic, because I'm very into graphic shapes. You know, I like strong shapes and graphics and everything and sharpness and everything. So I think I just quite like the idea of keeping the body kind of sharp and like a silhouette,
yeah.
but because obviously I was highlighting the hair, so I couldn't highlight the hair and not spend time on the face. Otherwise, it would have looked kind of it wouldn't have looked right, you know.
Right. And the hair is the one other part of the painting other than the backdrop that uses color.
Yeah, and that was deliberate. Yeah.
Yeah. It's deliberate. What did you have in mind?
Well, I just wanted this duo color contrast of
Yeah.
one color, and I
Yeah.
did try out before I settled on the gold. I did actually try out several other colors, including like a blue sky and things like that. And none of it worked. It really looked terrible. And I actually thought at one point I was going to have to abandon the painting, really.
Wow.
So, then I kind of rethought it and thought about things like golden years. And also the thing with metallic colors, this is obviously a metallic gold. And the thing with metallic colors is that it's not like they create all these different reflections and everything. So it adds another dimension to it. And I just realized that that's kind of what it needed to be behind the graphicness of the car and everything. It needed a kind of slightly amorphous background where, depending what lights on it, you get. Because I mean, this gold can look really bright, or it could look really brown, almost dark,
Yeah.
depending. depending on what the lighting is. So, and quite a few years ago, I did a series of paintings where, for instance, I'd have a matte black canvas and I would paint the image in gloss black. So in certain light, you couldn't even see the image. And in certain light, you got a negative effect or a positive effect. You can't, obviously this is not as extreme as that, but it's kind of it creates it creates kind of an amorphous background that can change in the light, which creates a bit more interest, really, I think.
Yeah. Well, we're going to move from this painting where color is so important. I'm going to show some of your other paintings that use very little or no color, and I'm going to move through them somewhat quickly and settle on one in particular I want to sort of get into in greater detail. So there's a little bit of color in this one, but not a lot. And then the same here, although what's obvious and what sticks out is the blue eyes. And I feel like I could talk to you a lot about just this one, but I want to settle on this one, which is entirely black and white. And first of all, let me ask this first, and then we'll get into the composition of the painting itself. When do you decide to work with black and white versus color? Like, that's a strategic choice as well.
It's just a gut feeling, really.
Yeah.
It just depends how you're feeling on the day. Sometimes you're feeling color, sometimes you're feeling monochrome. And I guess on that day, also there's a lot of people that make Bowie art, and they generally tend to base their art on very well-known photographs, which is something that I try not ever to really do, because, I don't really see the point in painting the Aladdin Sane cover because it's already been done. Or another, the amount of artists I've seen, when they're painting Bowie, they do the Bowie doing the shush gesture.
Right.
What I try to do is find the most obscure little, perhaps, but this was like a really bad quality obscure. It was about an inch high, black and white picture. And the challenge for me, because unless there's a challenge, there's no point doing it. The challenge for me is taking perhaps a very small newsprint picture like this was, like maybe an inch high, and elevating it up into hopefully a fairly beautiful piece of art. It's almost like transmutation, of base metal into gold sort of idea of because you have to know Bowie's face to be able to take a really bad quality little picture and kind of create it into something a bit more substantial. So that was really the idea behind this. It was a picture I'd never seen before. It was a very sort of small, insignificant little bad quality shot. But I just thought, well, if I create this into a fairly large painting, it could look quite impressive, because there's just something about the angle, there's something about the lighting, and there's something about the bone structure of his face and everything. Because as I said, I think in our last chat, I'm very obsessed with bone structures, facial bones and everything. So these sort of pictures appeal to me. And that was really why that one. And I think just because I could have put color onto it, but I think it's kind of, some images are just more powerful without color.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the bone structure, and one of the things that sticks out to me about this painting is if you could imagine the face without the hair, it's like you're looking at his skull, and you could really tell the bones under the face, and that's no accident, right? You just said it. You studied his face. Can you flesh that out? Pun intended. Can you flesh that out a little bit? So what are you studying, and what are you noticing that maybe the average person doesn't really think about that much?
Very good pun. Very good pun. I mean, because of the life masks and everything, and because obviously I've studied so many photographs over the years and everything, I'm very, very familiar with David Bowie's bone structure, which he really had an incredible bone structure. And what happened was when he was very, very thin, obviously the bone structure shows up a lot more. And so you can clearly see. And I mean, one area of the human face I really like is obviously had great cheekbones, but the brow bone area, I always like that. So uh, it's kind of a bit like an anatomy sort of painting in a way, really, human anatomy. When you know when you actually you can see the bones that clearly. But he kind of looked beautiful because he had such great bone structure. You know, somebody else that was that thin that perhaps didn't have good bone structure would not have looked so great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just, this is less of a question than a comment, but I'm just struck that uh, in the hands of a lesser artist, because this is an unfamiliar picture, it would be really easy to get it wrong and not make it recognizably David Bowie. And I was thinking about how, you slap a lightning bolt or and a red mullet on any shape and it's David Bowie, but that's not the case here, right? I mean, you're conveying the essence of Bowie through his bone structure and through that intimate familiarity with his face.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also it's obviously taken from a live performance, probably the Tower Theatre or something like that. So it's got that live. It kind of has somehow it has a bit of a live movement to it as well, which I
Yeah.
think about the image as well. It's like he's under the spotlights. You can see that because the reflections in the eyes and everything. So I just really like the image. A lot of people don't like images of him when he's that thin, you know, but I just always have. I've, like I said, I've always been a fan of bones, you know, bone structures.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a little detour off of David Bowie because art, in addition to having aesthetic value, has commercial value. And one of the things that I'm struck by about your art is that it blends both in some circumstances. I once heard an interview with another artist who was asked, "Can a commercial truly be art?" And I think the answer is yes. And I'm going to show some images that you've done for Glitterbox. I'm going to ask you to explain what Glitterbox is and what the functional utility of the art is. But here, before I get into more focused images of your art, this is an example of it on display. I think on a highway in London. You could correct me if that's not correct. But here are posters that you did advertising Glitterbox. And while I'm showing these, why don't you explain what? Oh, I'll stop on that. What is Glitterbox first of all?
Okay, Glitterbox is it started as a summer season party in Ibiza, and what their ethos is, they were bringing back kind of old school disco, but in a kind of reinvented way. So it was very much about um, classic disco tunes with vocals, but with remixes and stuff like that, featuring a lot of the world's top club DJs. And it became such a success that it's exploded into a worldwide brand, and they have parties in every country in the world all the time now. I mean, I think they're currently in Australia, they do New York, they do Miami, they do London, they do. I mean, they have massive parties everywhere, which are packed with kids, and they have people like Chaka Khan performing and people like that, doing PAs and everything. And it's been going now for 10 years. And just after it started going, I was the work the my artwork's always been I've always been involved in the music and the club world on a commercial level. It's been one outlet for my art, one context for my art. So uh, club artwork that I'd done in the past was brought to the attention of Simon Dunmore, who was the CEO of Glitterbox, and they took me on as their basically, I suppose you could say, commercial artist creating hopefully iconic kind of images to publicize the various parties around the world, which has been fantastic. I've had a great time doing it. And yeah, I'm still doing it 10 years later. So
Yeah.
that images of all. And it's a great buzz because um, seeing your work 50 foot high on a on a hoarding on a motorway, or 50 foot high in an amazing on a huge screen with like 1,000 people watching it, you know, which is kind of what happens. It's such a buzz. I mean, it really is a cool buzz, you know, when you see that. So yeah, it's a very exciting project, you know, and it's just incredible how that brand has exploded into this massive worldwide situation.
Yeah, you're describing, I think, the reaction that you're trying to get. And I look at this and I'm like, okay, I want to go to a party with this person. And so I want to sort of ask a couple different questions, but before I what order to ask them in? Let me ask it in this order. So first of all, if I go to a party, can I actually meet this person?
Well, actually, it's not a real person.
Oh,
All of the all of my images for nightclubs have never really actually been real people. They're just invented.
yeah.
It kind of relates to the David Bowie thing because they're created personas. They're not like he created his characters, like, you know, obviously Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane, Thin White Duke. So what I'm doing with the club people, I'm creating these characters that aren't actually real, and I'm putting them together from various different sources. So they're a bit like Frankenstein. So I'll maybe take I'll take eyes from one picture and combine them with a mouth from a different picture, and combine them with a face shape from something else, and put all that together, and then repaint it as a painting. So they look like actual people, but they're not. They're idealized kind of club icons in a way.
Yeah, I was thinking that what you're doing is you're approaching like the platonic ideal of a party goer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So the other thing, that I was thinking about is it's so fundamental that maybe you think about this, maybe you don't. If you didn't have the image, you could just put the information, and people would still know what bands are showing up, and when it is and where it is. But the image evokes an emotional response, which you were sort of talking about when you see your own work. But um, a potential party goer is getting into the mood of the party just by looking at the picture.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, what you're doing is transmitting the kind of feeling of of the party in a way, in a glamorous, striking. People are very attracted to glamorous, striking fashion type of images. You know, I've always been attracted to that sort of very stark, very glamorous kind of thing. And people really react to it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a kind of iconic looking image that people think, like you said, oh, I want to go to that party and be with people like that, or or it gives transmits kind of the atmosphere of what the party is going to be like, so people kind of have an idea of, obviously looking at this, it's not a heavy metal concert, you know what I mean? It's kind of it's got its own particular vibe.
Yeah, yeah. So let's move from this, where I think what part of what I was trying to get at with some of my questions was about how an artist approaches a commercial project. So Mark, so we're transitioning to looking at some of the Polaroid pictures that you took, and one of the things that strike me is the way somebody with an artistic eye can use a tool like a Polaroid camera, which a few decades ago was so common that anybody could take a Polaroid picture. But whether it's conscious or not, there's elements of your Polaroids that are very different than the run of the mill Polaroid that your Uncle Frank might have taken. And these are some of yours. But I went into my basement and found just a regular Polaroid in my personal collection from the 80s. And that's me on the one end, and my father on the other end, and my grandfather and great grandfather. And this is from 1984. And I'm showing this because there's a lot of differences in just the composition of this image with the composition of some of your Polaroids, which distinguish the one as just like a memory and the other as art. And so that's a sort of a lead up for to hand off to you. What are you doing with these Polaroids?
Well, I think like there's two types of Polaroids. There's a Polaroid that you're taking with a specific purpose, with an art purpose, which is what these are. And there's like the Polaroid you showed, which is it's just a memory.
Yeah,
You know, the person that's taking it isn't thinking about composition or whatever. They just want to get the people into the picture. And that's what it's about. And I've got plenty of Polaroids that are like that. But
yeah,
I mean, these Polaroids in particular are of the band Japan. And I was friendly with the singer David, who invited me down to take these Polaroids. And they were specifically taken because I based a lot of my art back then on Polaroids that I'd actually taken, and I might start doing it again because they've started making the SX70 film. I've still got my camera, and so the purpose of these was to actually use them to make paintings from. So the emphasis was kind of on the face, whereas like with the one you showed, it was just to get the people in. So
yeah,
the emphasis wasn't on anyone's particular face. And I just think, I don't know, I just guess if you're used to, if you're an artist and you're used to having an eye for composition, it's kind of automatic, really.
mhm,
I mean, with the Polaroids like this, instead of having a background of your grandma's curtains or just a white wall or whatever, obviously I realized that blue showed up well on Polaroid film, so I created a blue paper background photograph and a red paper background because strong colors. Otherwise, Polaroids can look a bit brown or a bit dull. Um,
right.
that's kind of why. So they were purposely done as I wasn't planning to use them as the Polaroids. I was planning to use them as sources for art. But later on, I realized after the passing of time, when these things start to look a bit more, they've got a weight of history behind them, suddenly they become more important in themselves. So now the Polaroids are kind of more important than anything I might have done with them, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just a couple other things that strike me about these pictures. The symmetry is, almost exact, right? I mean, the face is right in the middle. And also, and again, I want to ask if this was deliberate, but the shadow, I think, is it's part of the image. It's almost like a black halo of sorts. The detail of the face becomes sort of more abstract, and it sort of harkens back to the image that we were looking at earlier of David Bowie's face being very detailed, and then the further down you go in his body, it becomes a little more abstract. And here, it's the face itself is very, obviously it's a photo, but the lines of the face merge with the lines of the shadow. Um, is that something that's conscious, or like you were saying, is it just something that's almost automatic to somebody with an artistic eye?
It's interesting, actually. I hadn't thought of the connection between this and what you're talking about with the uh, painting of Bowie with the car. Yeah, what happens when you see? I really liked, in a way, I was kind of imitating Andy Warhol because he took a lot of Polaroids and they're quite high contrast. So the face is kind of slightly bleached out, and you get that heavy shadow around the figure, which kind of pulls it out from the background in a way. It's like a show. I've always loved that, and in fact, I use that, and I put quite often in my paintings or images that I'm making for clubs, I will deliberately put a sharp black shadow around to make it look as if it's been an image that's been taken by a flash. I like that kind of rabbit in the headlines, rabbit kind of effect that you can get with the flash on Polaroid, and also the actual process kind of slightly softens the features. So they're very flattering. You don't get any wrinkles or spots or pores or anything like that. So you get a very flattering picture with a Polaroid camera.
Yeah, right. Wow. Yeah. Well, yeah, these are great. So we're going to move from the Polaroids back to David Bowie. And I'm going to sort of move through these quickly as I'm asking just a couple of sort of closing questions. Reflecting on your body of work, Bowie remains a central subject, not your only subject, but you return to Bowie. And I was wondering, as you look back over time, does your view or do your thoughts about him as a subject change? When you're approaching a new portrait of David Bowie now, are you thinking about him in a different way, and are you thinking about what you're doing with him in the piece of art in a different way?
I don't think I'm thinking about him. But I mean, what I tend to do is my interest in Bowie is really kind of the mid-70s. What I'm doing really, I'm painting a character.
Yeah,
Most of my images, the era that I'm obsessed with, the Bowie era, is kind of really 74 to 76 when he was basically portraying characters. So what I'm kind of doing, I'm portraying him portraying a character.
yeah,
And so it's kind of a double thing in a way. So it's in a way they're not really portraits of him; they're portraits of the character he was portraying at the time. And I find that endlessly fascinating, really. And I still do. So no, I don't really think my thoughts on that have really changed at all.
well, if you've painted him in different ways, and so are you as you approach a portrait, are you thinking of trying something new or trying something different? What one of your, I don't have it in this show here, but one of your very earliest paintings was of David Bowie, and you have more, much more contemporary paintings of him as well. Are you trying out different techniques when on your favorite subject?
Okay, all right. Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, David Bowie was kind of the big bang moment for me of being an artist, and that's what started me off as taking it seriously. And some of my earliest works were, as you say, of David Bowie, and it's kind of continued. Obviously, as an artist, what you don't want to get stale and bored with. I mean, you can't really get bored with David Bowie as an image, but if you did every painting in the same style, you could paint yourself into a corner and get a bit bored. So trying out different techniques keeps it fresh and exciting. Or even though you're portraying the same subject, it kind of keeps it exciting and a bit more dangerous, because if you're trying a new technique, you're not really sure exactly how it's going to work out. And sometimes some of the things don't work, and you just end up abandoning it. But yeah, I mean, working in different techniques just keeps it, I think, exciting and fresh. And I think that comes out in the work as well. I think it shows up in the work. I think you can tell when people are just being mechanical.
Yeah.
Is to try not to end up just being a mechanical person, sort of churning out the same technique thing over and over again. At least that for me. So it works for some people.
You said something a couple of minutes ago that reminded me of a question that I've asked before, which is David Bowie. You're painting David Bowie portraying characters. Is David Bowie a character?
Yeah, because I mean, David Jones. So it kind of David Bowie was a character, and then the character was inventing characters. So yeah, there's all those different layers. It's very fascinating, and from a psychological point of view, I'm sure it's something that he obviously was very aware of, and you know, it's interesting to to imagine what sort of effect that would have on you when you, especially when he was David Bowie, the character, portraying, say, the Thin White Duke, the character. There's that whole double thing
Yeah.
there, the real person behind it. Because I think Iman, his wife, has said she didn't marry David Bowie. She married David Jones, you know. And, you know, yeah. So, I mean, David Bowie wasn't real.
Yeah. I think that that has something to do with the enduring appeal. If you think of David Bowie as a character like you're describing, like Sherlock Holmes or James Bond, you know, there are different depictions of Sherlock Holmes and James Bond today. And you know, some of the evolution of your art is depicting this character in different ways that if it was just the person portraying the character might seem less present or less relevant. But your art, and not just your art, the books about David Bowie, the music that's been inspired by David Bowie, it seems very relevant even now as we're approaching the 9th anniversary of his death.
Yeah, absolutely. Unbelievable that it's 9 years,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, it's crazy. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
Mark, this has been terrific, and I really enjoyed talking with you. At this point, people watching this are going to want a Mark Wardell for themselves, and I wanted to ask if people were interested in acquiring a piece of your art, where could they do that?
Okay. Well, I have a website, markwardell.com, and I also have an online store, trashdna.com, which mostly sells prints, and I take orders for Bowie masks. I mean, I don't really do many of the Bowie masks. I'm kind of trying to get away from those, but I do take on couple of orders on those. But yeah, basically markwardell.com or trashdna.com for the online store. I think there's a link from the website to the store.
I'll make sure to put a link in the blog post too, just to make it easier. But this is terrific, Mark. Thank you very much. This is wonderful. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm hoping that this is not your last visit to my YouTube channel. I really enjoy talking with you.
Fantastic. Listen, John, I could talk about David Bowie and my art endlessly, so I'm happy to come back anytime. It's been a great pleasure talking to you again.
Wonderful. That makes me happy. Mark Wardell, thank you very much.
Thank you.